Welcome to Quarantine Zone, a podcast for HBO's The Last of Us. We're your hosts, Andrew Sorsini,
Dwayne D,
and Tosin Anafawalkin.
We just watched the 5th episode of The Last of Us, entitled Endure and Survive. We assume you have as well. Total spoilers ahead. So let's dive into the aftertalk, but first we've got some online spots where you can get in contact with us. You can write to us or email us a voice memo at quarantinezonepod@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at QZPod. Add us on iTunes, like us, and please leave a review. That's how we get noticed. This episode was written by Craig Mazin and directed by Jeremy Webb, who directed the previous episode, and also Umbrella Academy and Masters of Sex. I had a feeling that these two episodes exist as kind of a diptych, so I think it was a good idea to have the same director direct.
It's a two-parter.
It's a two-parter, really. Dwayne, why don't you give us a recap of this episode?
So we meet Henry and his little brother Sam. Kathleen accuses them of collaborating with Kansas City's chapter of Fedra, which was infamous for its cruelty and exploitation of the population that it managed in its quarantine zone. Henry's brother is deaf, and Henry collaborated with Fedra to get Sam what he needs to survive. He's wanted by Kathleen for the collaboration, and it turns out that some info he gave to Fedra led to them killing her brother, who was widely seen as a resistance hero. While in hiding with Dr. Edelstein, after the fall of Fedra, Henry realizes he needs to get out of Kansas City. Dr. Edelstein goes in search of food and gets caught and killed by Kathleen, as we saw last episode. Henry witnesses Joel and Ellie's confrontation with Kathleen's freedom fighters, and when he sees how effective a team they are, he follows them and proposes that they work together. He doesn't really give Joel much of a choice. Henry follows Joel and convinces him to escape the city through tunnels that Fedra cleared of infected years ago. Joel agrees, and they make it past the settlement and through the tunnels, only to be confronted by a sniper working for Kathleen. While in the tunnels, Henry confesses to Joel that his little brother had leukemia, and that Fedra owned drugs to cure the little boy that required him to give him something big to Fedra, and that big thing was Kathleen's brother, who seemed to lead the resistance until his death at the hands of Fedra. And that saw Kathleen rise to fulfill his dream of overturning Fedra. Joel reluctantly kills the sniper, but only after Kathleen and her team were alerted. Kathleen and her team scurry to capture Henry just outside of town. A vehicle pursuing Ellie gets shot by Joel and explodes with massive concussive force, knocking down Ellie. Henry grabs her and gives her cover behind the car. Kathleen confronts Henry and basically confesses that Sam should have died. He wasn't worth the death of her brother. Kids die all the time in this world. The concussive explosion has awakened infected from afar. They burst to the ground, overwhelming the freedom fighter army. And after a bit of sniper action, the incursion of infected gives Joel, Henry, and the others a diversion for escape amongst the ensuing mayhem. Kathleen dies a brutal death at the hands of infected. After they escape and find a place to camp for the night, we learn that Sam, Henry's little brother, is infected. Ellie tells Sam that her blood is medicine. She cuts herself and places her blood on Sam's wound. The next morning, we find out that her blood didn't work. Sam is infected. He attacks Ellie. Henry shoots him dead. Never having killed someone, he can't take the horror of having killed his brother and immediately shoots himself dead. Joel and Ellie bury the bodies of Henry and Sam and head west once again on their own. And that's the episode.
What were your impressions of this episode?
I feel like last episode and this episode, like you said, it's a two-parter. The thing that gets me about these two episodes is that they seem incredibly straightforward. They managed to include action, thicken the plot a little bit, and at the same time, we get some pretty powerful character building stuff. We see Ellie being a kid again with Sam. And we see Joel kind of being super, we learned a little bit about Joel and how he deals with honesty. And I thought that was pretty cool. What about you, Andy?
Well, my synopsis of what I felt about this was the red wedding of the Last of Us episodes. This was one of those episodes where you go in not knowing what's going to happen. You feel this sort of sense of impending dread. There's this amazing moment where where literally everyone gets massacred. Practically everyone gets massacred except for maybe one or two people. In this case, our protagonists. And then even after that point, there's still a more fallout that involves death to some of our main characters. So, but
I feel like the Red Wedding ended up killing a lot of people you cared about.
Yeah. Well,
this, I mean, statistically, like, if you're going to use a percentage of people you care about, then yes, it was a high.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about the end of this episode. Henry and Sam are dead. So
right, that's like 50% of the people you care about. Yeah. But so that's significant. I give you that. But the actual like violent moment, it was more like I don't know.
It was
a massacre.
Get
Red Wedding emotions of seeing like Catelyn Stark being taken down, kind of thing, or like Rob having a wolf son on his.
More the idea that it's this sheer massacre that suddenly occurs out of nowhere. So
okay.
I guess in both cases you were aware of the source material, Dwayne, so you knew that was coming in Game of Thrones, and you also knew it was kind of coming in this. I get both of your sentiments, in terms of you only develop the relationship with these characters in this one episode, but it is a loving relationship that you get to see throughout the course of the first 40 minutes. But it is,
and you do come to like Henry. I didn't really care about Henry when I first met him, but I came to like him toward the end.
Yeah. So
I at least trust him around Elliot. Yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
But yeah, no, I totally get Andy's vibe as well too. The unexpected death and the sort of dramatic undertones that it sets up. For me, my initial thoughts of this episode was when it first started off is like, oh man, this has makeup of a really good heist. They've got the plan that they need to take. They've got to execute this, and what's going to go wrong. Is something going to go wrong in the tunnels, which is what I sort of expected from the game.
Right, they flipped the tunnels thing on its head. You always expect some shit to go down in the tunnels. The minute someone says tunnels in a video game or anything, unless it's like Avatar: The Last Airbender with the moles, you're like, some shit's going down in the tunnels. Yeah, and of course, nothing went down in the goddamn tunnels.
Yeah,
which is very interesting. But ultimately, my feeling, like, I enjoyed this episode, but it left me with the general sentiment of, life is complex. Because there are decisions that we make that can change the course of history, and, people care for... It's kind of like the trolley experiment, right? Where it's which track do you want it to go? Who do you want it to run over? The same sort of things that we think about when we explore artificial intelligence and self-driving and the decision-making of that. That notion.
So you're saying, Kathleen, in this world, it's like, would we rather have Kathleen's brother in charge and have Sam be dead and the resistance being led by a hero? Or is it better that Sam survived this far and the resistance, managed to destroy Phaedra, but it's led by a mad person or a person who wants a revenge to the exclusion of all reason, that kind of thing.
So
that's an interesting thing because Sam does end up dead. So the question is, was he worth it, right? On some level.
Yeah,
like, Sam's dead. But would Kathleen's brother have actually fulfilled the destiny that Kathleen did in terms of taking over Phaedra? I mean, Perry makes it pretty clear that while he was a great person, he did not lead to Phaedra being overturned. His death got Kathleen to lead, and Kathleen's leadership led to Phaedra being overturned, which is a cornerstone bit of knowledge to understand why someone as powerful as Perry is following someone as sort of maniacal as Kathleen.
Yeah, I think maybe moving on from our impressions to aspects of the show. Kathleen, played by Melanie
Linsky.
Yep, she definitely gives that sort of teacher vibe, right? Where she's
Sure.
polite yet stern.
Miss Nelson.
Yep. But it's also like incredibly ruthless, and because she knows it, and because she, it makes that admission that several times makes an admission that her brother would want them to be alive. Her brother would want forgiveness and forgetting, or you should have let your brother die. I see kids dead all the time. That also makes her sinister. So it's really this dynamic of kind yet sinister, and I can totally. I don't know if any of you guys have watched Yellow Jackets, but there's a similar vibe there without spoiling anything on that show.
She plays a character on that show as well, right?
Yes, she plays a character on that show.
I haven't seen Yellow Jackets, but I will say that she was incredibly frightening.
Yes,
because of exactly what you said. Because she could be polite and she could be disarming and innocent, and even her voice is a calming voice, right? It's not.
Yes.
I wouldn't call it maternal, but it's a trustworthy voice. Her mannerisms are trustworthy. And she's like, you guys will get a trial. You guys will spend some time in jail. And she walks out of the room and she effectively is like, shoot them all.
Yeah.
She's like, that's the kind of thing I expect from like the man in the high castle or some other like institutional fucked up shit. You know what I mean? But I did not expect it right then and right there. So yeah, it was jarring and upsetting, and the fact that those men just blindly followed orders, and he's like, "Are we really going to give him a trial?" And they just shot him to death. Ugh.
I think there's a couple things I need to say about that. I first of all, I think it's very facile to create a villain with a conspicuous menace, like Negan from The Walking Dead, for example, leather-clad, carrying a barbed wire bat. But Kathleen
Negan was at least super. He was affable. Like, you kind of wanted to be friends with Negan on some level. You kind of like, Negan's whole thing was people are a resource, and he meant it in a weird, sinister way. But Negan also, like, I would throw what you're talking about at the governor more so than Negan.
Well,
so pause for a second here.
Yeah,
I only watched the first season, and there may be listeners who've never watched Walking Dead. Can you give us a quick briefer on who Negan was?
Okay, so there's a group called the Survivors in The Walking Dead. And the Survivors are a little different in the comics than they are on the TV show. But effectively, they're led by a man named Negan, who has created this cult of personality around him such that his entire group of people considers themselves Negan. And the thing about him is that, at least in the TV show, he's played as an incredibly affable and charismatic man,
yet menacing.
Everyone is afraid of.
Yes,
everyone is afraid of. But he's not like a mustache twisting villain the way sort of the governor was. The governor had some sympathy. Negan has very little sympathy to him, but Negan is very much the kind of person that you want to, for lack of a better term, you could see yourself getting a beer with this guy. But when push comes to shove, he'll murder you in an instant. Is jarring. Whereas Kathleen, she comes across as sincerely wanting to make sure everyone is okay.
Sure.
But then she's like,
there is not that cult of personality that you're describing with Negan, with Kathleen.
Exactly. They trust her and they're behind her and they're loyal to her. But she's disarming in a way that Negan isn't. You're like, oh, and part of it, she's a woman and she's not like muscled. She's no Tess in terms of her physicality. You can see Tess taking down people with fists or whatever. Sure. But when you see Kathleen, you see a person who seems softer. So to the point where people thought, they're online, you find some resignation or some dissent about the casting choice. But I thought it was brilliant because this disarming person who kind of comes across honestly as an innocent, right?
Yes.
is actually in fact ruthless
Yes.
in her quest to like avenge her brother, and that to me made her truly frightening, like nightmaringly-ish frightening.
Yes,
so,
but she comes across as someone who doesn't need to flex her power. She carries it with this quiet confidence, but there is that sort of simmering.
Which is the opposite of Negan, who walks around with a bat like surrounded in barbed wire, right?
Right. The other thing I wanted to say is this group that overthrew Casey Fedra, that now has an official name, the Resistance. We see that as what happens in the case of many military coups, the new regime is no less brutal and dictatorial than the old regime. You know, that you just replaced,
perhaps even more brutal in its quest for purity from the old regimes, like remnants.
Yes. So we hear it with, you know, we can put you on trial. You're all guilty, so that's how that'll go. You know.
Yeah, totally.
I thought it was interesting also that Kathleen admits that she's not as gracious as her brother was. This is her failing. She accepts it, and then she also at the same time tries to rationalize it. She understands that she doesn't have the grace or forgiveness that her brother did, and she tries to rationalize that so that
she doesn't even have to rationalize. Her people are straight up like, yeah, he was a great leader, but he did not get us free of Fedra. You did.
Right.
I feel like, so she's supported because it doesn't matter, you know, like many people are kind of like, it doesn't matter what you'll see people who have hero worship for any number of heroes, and they're like, it doesn't matter what else they've done. The one, you know, cornerstone accomplishment they have is what I care about. And with Kathleen, you know, Fedra was taken out. I mean, we hear about Fedra, Kansas City Fedra. Joel says that they were really brutal, and then Henry comes out and says like they were straight up raping people on the regular,
right.
And so on for 20 years. So like they were bad. We don't know what happened to Kathleen under Fedra. We knew she grew up there, right? That's another thing about Kathleen. She grew up in Kansas City. She grew up with her brother protecting her. She grew up even after it all went down. The very doctor that delivered her was still there. And we don't know exactly what happened, but we do know that at the end of it all, she's so scarred, she could shoot that very doctor dead, right?
Sure.
So
sure.
She's been through it. She's been through some shit. So, you know, not to justify her actions, but that Kansas City Fedra seems to be like the worst. And we've heard about Fedra being bad, but like just sort of like what's implied is really messed up.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show that things are pretty complex. There's a lot of gray area. No, you know, very clear cut black and white.
Right, motivations are different there. But what's interesting is that her brother's lionized. Like I was, fourth wall before the recording today, we were talking about John Connor from the Terminator universe,
right.
or universes, and you know, Kathleen's brother, who's not really named in the show.
He is.
Across.
She mentions his name in the scene in her bedroom. But I forget what it was.
Exactly. Like it's not actually an important fact, like what his name was. But he comes across as John Connor. And by that, I mean, in the Terminator first movie and the second movie, you learn about John Connor as a legend. Everyone talks about how he valiantly led the resistance against the machines, and it actually worked, and he rallied people together and all these things. But you don't meet that version of John Connor.
Right.
You never do. You only meet the version of John Connor who's super young and Eddie Furlong. And I guess later in other iterations of Terminator, you might meet another version of John Connor who's actually evil, whatever. But at the end of the day, John Connor is a person who is told as a point of legend. And in this case, so is her brother. Meanwhile, she is very much, even though she's his sister, she comes across as Sarah Connor, like ruthless, doing all the things that John can't be sullied. You know, Sarah Connor can sully her hands, especially in the Sarah Connor Chronicles. But, you know, John's hands can't be sullied because he has to be an important leader. And that's kind of like the vibe you get out of Kathleen. So it was all very interesting. I think it was interesting how it really brought me back to this idea of like the iconic leader. And that's John Connor, a person we've never met, just like Kathleen's brother.
Right. I thought it was interesting that there was a distinct change from the game to the show in that Sam is deaf. And I initially thought that change was going to make him susceptible to not hearing the infected that would inevitably bite him. It's like I knew from playing the game that Sam would be bitten and infected and die in this episode. But I thought maybe because he was deaf, that was going to be part of the device that they would use to get him to a vulnerable spot where he's attacked. But it wasn't.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be the case too. Yeah, but I think it was great that it wasn't. Right? Like it was kind of like they keep on bringing in, with Bill and Frank, and now with Sam and Henry, they're bringing in kind of like representation that we don't normally see in the video game genre. And what's interesting is that Sam's fight with the infected to get away wasn't really diminished by his disability, his inability to hear. It would have been interesting if they used that as an asset. So, for instance, when the super bloater showed up and started making its echolocation sounds, if he could hear that in a way that, or feel that vibration, because he was attuned to it. But I'm kind of glad they didn't go sort of like Daredevil on Sam. The mundane version of having hearing impairment is important. Like, not, the idea that you can have hearing impairment and that's part of your life, but it doesn't totally like limit your life. To me is a better message than like, you have hearing impairment, it's a science fiction show, and therefore you can like hear things before others, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was great that the show in general definitely fosters representation, chooses actors and who embody that. So like Kevon Woodard, who plays Sam, he is deaf as and we also know that Murray Bartlett also is homosexual and so I think it's great that they are making sure that they're having representative characters but and actors, and also not making these differences seem as disabilities, which so many works of fiction do, or so many works of fiction lead that to be like, oh, that's the reason why Frank is dying or sick. But no, it's not that. It's normal health reasons, or that's the reason that Sam gets caught. It's not that at all. So I think that's really important, and I think Sam as a character is really interesting because I think for two reasons. One thing is because he can only because he can't hear and he's deaf. Sure. In his eyes, everyone is dangerous. Everyone other than his brother, and to a certain extent, Ellie. So when we first are introduced to him, he kind of lingers in a corner. He separates himself from everyone else. And what we learn about him and what we learn about this world is the only form of trusted communication is either sign language or written language. Because every time anyone else speaks, it's typically a lie or there are lies involved, right? Kathleen said, hey, we're not going to kill you. And then she ends up telling them to all be killed, right? In certain instances, when his brother initially was like, oh, that guy's safe. Then later on, his brother, Henry, signs to him, no, he's probably not. So those are the only forms of language that actually embody trust. And so I think it's even more powerful later when Ellie says that she'll stay up with him. And we know that Ellie has fallen asleep before. So this is a second time. And she writes that out. And she unfortunately falls asleep. And we find out that even the written word can also be a lie. You can't really trust anything in this world. And I think that's partially why she's really sorry. Because she lied to him in the form of communication that he finds, that it was his safe space.
Right. And even though it's an unintentional lie, it means that he ended up suffering his fear. He was alone, right?
Yeah.
And that was his whole thing. He wrote down, like, I don't want to be alone. And then he ends up, or rather she wrote that down.
He
But
put his trust in her, and she inadvertently betrayed it.
Yeah, but
Right.
the interesting thing
although
about
I don't know
that,
what she'd see is like, okay, so would she see him like kind of twitch and then become a baddie? You know, like it's unclear what she would have.
Call us Joel and Henry and have them do something about it.
Right.
but to be honest, I do think that that in his final moments that, you know, I think he still had that trust of her. So it's an interesting dynamic, right? So earlier in the episode, we have Joel to ask Ellie, "Do you trust me?" when he's going through the, you know, sniper portion of the game, of the show. And at that point, she's like, "Yes, I trust you," and that trust becomes warranted. But in this case, you know, that trust is not warranted. However, I think because of Sam's proclivity to be a superhero, to feel that sort of representation, to realize that he's not alone and feel sort of brave, I think that he still holds that, in my belief, he still kind of holds that internally. So for example, right, when the drawings he puts on the wall of the superhero, you know, destroying Fedra, destroying any of sort of the bad guys they're chasing, it's always with like the laser eyes, or you see the heart, or you see like rays of what I thought was like light or sun shining at him. And in that very last moment, he's looking outside that sort of open, that window, closed window, at the light that's reflecting on him. I think he has ultimately gotten that sort of point where he feels has become that superhero that he wants to be. And that's also that exact same sort of motif that we see in the last episode with Bill and Frank, where we end up on that shot looking out that window, looking at the light, because that represents that they've gone somewhat beyond where they wanted to be as individuals.
Don't go to the light.
Well,
like when you see the light, don't go there. But that's true. I did wonder about the boy sitting. I did wonder about the boy sitting there and staring at the light, and it makes you wonder, because he said, you know, does the monster like take you over? Like we don't know, and we'll never know. Maybe what it's like to have the infection take you, and he's there and he's scared, and that happens. I gotta say something about the infections, guys.
Yeah,
this is the second time that the infection hits somebody up in the heat of the moment, and unlike in any kind of like verisimilitude situation, there's no outcry of pain, right? Like he's kicking, and you know, Tess was fighting, whatever, and then like they reveal that they got bit. There's no, and it doesn't like seem like it hurts them, right? Like when he shows the wound to Ellie, you know, he's not shaking in pain. He's not scared. He's like, look, I have a wound. And when Tess reveals her wound, it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
So I gotta say, it's like the one sort of turn off with the way they're depicting these wounds, right? Like you're coming to blows with these baddies. Even when Ellie got bit, you didn't really see her going, ow, look, I got bit. You know what I mean? She's just like, oh, I got bit. It's weird to me that it's not more of a thing. If I got bit by a regular person, I'd be like, damn, that hurts.
Yeah.
So
maybe it's
when you're getting bit by like a rabid infected person, unless they've got like some sort of mosquito like anesthetic that's coming into you, I don't know. It just feels like
I don't know. I feel like you know, generally because of there's so much adrenaline pumping through you, because you're kind of fighting for your life in more than one way. Like, you know, typically when
once that would have been cool in a 10 episode series. But like 3 times so far, I'm over it.
and also, I think for me, like the most important stuff here is that when you look at both Sam and Tess, is this duality in many regards, right? So there's there's the duality with the end of death and heartbreak. You know, there's the heartbreak for Joel, There's the heartbreak for Ellie in this episode, and it's very sort of Shakespearean. And I think we see near the end, Joel is reflecting, as he's burying these graves with Ellie, is like, is this what we can expect from Joel and Ellie? Anytime we've seen a pair of people throughout the course of this show, they don't make it to the end. And so I think that
Tess was on her own, but she wasn't really a pair. But yeah, I see what you're saying. When people show up, they're like the Doctor, like the Doctor is always there, but there's always death around him, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tess was with Joel, right? They were connected. Bill at least thought they were connected, and so I think, and even when Tess died, right? Immediately after that happened, Ellie pauses, and Joe was the one who says, "Hey, we've got to continue this mission." He sets the pace and kind of makes them leave, even with his heartbreak. And in this case, the roles are reversed, right? This is the first time we see Ellie cry. And then she's the one taking the lead, while Joel.
Oh no, Ellie cried last episode after she took out the dude who ended up having to be finished off by Joel. She's pretty upset.
Yeah, but I think this is like she really cried in this episode, right? Like it wasn't just like a single tear. Sure. But in either case, she's the one leading. She's the one leading the group out, saying like, "Hey, we gotta go. We gotta keep moving." Yeah. Even though she was the one who, in this episode, I believe was closest. She was closer to Sam than, Joel was to Henry. And
totally, I think she thought Sam could maybe be a friend. I mean, granted, she's older than Sam by a good 6 years, right? She's like 14 and he's like 8. That's a big gap. But at the same time, in this world and on the voyage that they're on, it's it's good to have another kid around. And I think he liked the same comics that she did and all that stuff. So it was, I think she had seen a possibly different trip, right? Going forward, from now on, it would be a different journey. It'd be 4 of them. They made their fellowship bigger, all that stuff. So there's a lot of hope for someone like Ellie in that situation.
Right.
Especially because, she falls from the truck exploding, and for the first time, someone who isn't Joel picks her up and gets her to cover. And that was, that was Henry. And that was a big moment. I think when you look at that moment, she, obviously she gets deep trust in Henry. And then Henry effectively gives up his life for her safety. He stands up, he puts his hands up. He's the distraction. Meanwhile, Joel sees Henry doing that, getting Ellie up. And he's doing his sniper thing. And Joel also sees Henry raising his hands and talking to Kathleen. And so he, in all that scenario, despite the fact that that Henry was a collaborator and Joel doesn't super trust collaborators and all that stuff, Henry becomes a relatively trusted person in their little group in a very, short amount of time. And that I think, to your point, Tosin, gave Ellie a little hope their journey was going to kind of change, right? And she'd have some more more humanish people around her, because Joel can kind of often seem like an archetype rather than a person. So I do think that's pretty.
When Joel walks away, Ellie's forced to follow, but in this case, I think because they've started kind of building that family relationship that they don't fully have, but that they see that Henry and Sam had, that Ellie actually pauses and waits for Joel to catch up and waits for Joel to kind of lead the way, for Joel to continue being that sort of heavy role that both Henry saw him as, but also Ellie sees him as her sort of protector.
Sure. I mean, she does say she's burying him. She puts the thing down and she's like, "Which way's west?" And she's like, "Let's just get going on with this." And I feel like that's the kind of thing that Joel would have said, episode 1, "We're going west. Let's go." And she would have been like, and now she's like, I can't even I can't get close to anybody. Joel's obviously her person, but I just want to put this behind me.
Ellie got a little bit of a taste of what Joel experienced 20 years ago with Sarah.
Yes. I think that's, and I think you're right to say a little bit of a taste, right? Who knows how much it's affected her? She was raised in this pandemic,
but at the same time, it's one of those things where she's got to cover up her emotions, and we saw her do that when she shot the guy, Brian or whatever, last episode. She's kind of steeling herself, STEEL, steeling herself to kind of like bury these emotions. But we all know what happens when things get buried. Fedra buried the infected underground, and they all came back. So
yes,
Ellie's got to make sure that doesn't happen to her emotions.
She doesn't bloat out of the ground with emotions. I wanted to bring up
exactly
a recurring theme in this episode. You see it first when Dr. Edelstein suggests to Henry that he should comfort Sam by showing him he's not scared. You know, something that it feels like Henry may not have necessarily been naturally inclined to do until Dr. Edelstein sort of suggests it.
Henry was a scared guy.
Yeah, and he didn't realize
and
that.
Reason. I mean, he had
for
Kathleen
sure.
after his ass with the army of guns. Yeah,
but then we see it again in Kathleen's bedroom when she tells Perry about her own brother, comforting her when she said she was scared, which mirrors that relationship, Henry's relationship with Sam. And then we see it the final time with Ellie and Sam, where Ellie's in a position to comfort him after he reveals to her that he's been bitten, you know, and I was unclear whether or not when Ellie cuts her hand open and shares her blood with Sam, if this was a legitimate attempt to heal him, or if this was Ellie giving Sam false comfort because she knew that he was a goner already. But either way, this is a change from the game, and I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean,
the conversation.
I don't think that it was. I'm just gonna jump in here. I don't think that she was. It was false comfort. I think that she's like, maybe this will work. I also feel like it was cool that the bite was in his leg, and in the first episode, the leg bites take up to 12 hours. Now he's a little boy, so it would take shorter time, but the leg bites taking up to 12 hours does mean that like a lot of what happened is relatively feasible. He turned, or he almost turned, whatever. But I do think that on some level she had hope that her blood could solve the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree that she had hope, that she thought it could actually do it. Because I think in any other scenario, she probably would have alerted someone else rather than let the two be in the same room. Now, granted, she knows that if someone bites her that she's okay, but she could still be torn apart. But I definitely do think that this is a chance where she thinks like, maybe I can save him. Maybe things can actually be a little different. Like, I've seen other people die in front of me and I didn't try to do anything. So maybe this is a chance for me to make things end up differently. And, you know, I think you actually even see that in her face a little bit before that, when, you know, Kathleen is pointing the gun at them, and there's the infected that's coming towards her.
Mm-hmm.
When that infected is initially on Kathleen, you see there is sort of hesitation from her, a hesitation from all of them. And there was definitely a moment there in which they probably could have saved Kathleen. But by the time Joel got there, it was too late.
Right.
And so, you know, I think part of it is the whole wondering, hey, if this happens, you know, when Kathleen says, this is what happens when you fuck with fate, where they're like, well, maybe we should just let her die. But I do think there was a part where there was like emotions.
When she was irredeemable.
They could have saved her, right? Because
sure.
I think
if they had saved her, though, she would have killed them. That's the thing. She was so irredeemable as a character. You know, she's like, my entire army is dying, but I'm ready to shoot you to get avenge my brother. And it was kind of like, all right, lady.
Right. She's not willing to spare even children who cross her, which is like clearly sort of narcissistic behavior.
Yeah.
And I think that it's ironic that the infected that does her in is a child.
Yeah. That child, by the way, I mean, okay, so obviously the infected getting into the car with Ellie was scary, but the kind of contortionist movements that it had, that, like, you know, like, all these shows are going to give you scares, all these shows are going to build up tension. Those contortions, because the way it got in, and then the way it, like, moved around.
Yeah.
And was it a clicker? It looked like it was a clicker, because
I think it was a clicker. Yeah,
distorted.
Yes.
So it could, like, hear her heartbeat, whatever it needs to hear, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so she, like, you know, Ellie, when that moment, because, you know, Ellie's, like, relatively protecting the car, but the moment she's like, I'm getting out of this F-150, fuck this.
Yeah.
I'm like, go, girl.
Yeah.
And she gets out, and the thing is still in there, but somehow it gets out. And it hones in on her. It follows her, right? Which is how it gets to Kathleen. And it was just, man, that was scary.
Yep. I gotta say, in that whole sequence, like, I've played this game. I know this level. I know what a bloater can do. You know, I knew what was coming, and yet that bloater moment still gave me sheer palpable terror both times that I watched this episode, and even knowing what to expect from the game. Like, I could feel chills running through me.
We only got, like, an impression of the bloater rips Perry's head off. That's fine.
Yeah. Which is, by the way that Joel dies in the game if you get caught by the bloater.
Yeah, if you get caught by the bloater, your head gets ripped off. Now, it's a game, so we're not, like, spoiling it. If you die in the game, you get to continue, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that they leave a lot of room for showing what else the bloater might do. It was also interesting, since they were going away from the rest of the crowd, how the majority of the infected was like, well, the meat's over here, so let's go that way. And they were able to kind of get away. But when the bloater takes out Perry, you kind of know it's over. At that point, it's just a question of, like, how long it's going to take them to, like, you know, wipe it out. But it was, it was definitely like a dour moment when Perry's head got ripped off. I was like, ooh, bloater, ooh, you're not beating that. Can we talk a little bit about last episode and how, like, there's some movement under the floor, and Perry's like, what are we gonna do about that? And then Kathleen's like, oh, we're just closing the door. Nothing to see here.
Right. It's a figurative ticking time bomb. That
totally
yes, that I knew any, you know, perceptive viewer would know that they'd have to address in this episode.
Right, and so here's the thing. Henry says that Fedra, you know, took out all the.
They drove the infected underground.
Exactly, and they drove the infected underground. Yet they get to the tunnels, they don't see infected. Then we see that undulating mass that Kathleen closes the door on. And then we see the exploded, you know, giant vehicle. And then out of the ground come all these infected. So are we to believe that the infected that Henry says was driven on the ground were all kind of, like, under the surface of the entire place, and the explosion opened up a hole? So they can go, like, what are we feeling happened?
I think so. I think they're still underground. There's a lot, you know, that was one of the things, you know, when Kathleen said to Perry, let's just lock this door and we'll come back to this, like, after we deal with our current issues.
Right.
They are underground. They're bubbling underground. But if you don't poke the bear, it's not going to come after you. And when the transport sunk into the sinkhole, it poked the bear, and so that wave of infected that were underground, including the bloater, just burst out. Which, by the way, that whole scenario where you're on the street and there's the sniper blind and the sniper shooting at you, that's in the game. And also once you get rid of the raiders, in this case the resistance, then the infected come after you, and it's not clear where the infected come from, and they just sort of come at you in spare waves. And the fact that you had them, like, pouring out, running at full speed out of a gaping hole in the ground was sheer terror. It was really terrifying.
You were resigned to like, and here's the best part about the blocking was at first the fury of bullets out of the resistance was like, oh, they might have this, and then you see one or two of the infected go and flank them, and then you're like, oh, nope. It's over.
Yep.
But I do want to talk about the sniper thing for a moment.
Sure.
For two reasons. One, finally a camping moment, right? As a gamer, camping is both reviled and necessary. You know what I mean? I don't know how many times I have taken down our friend Devindra Hardawar with a railgun in Quake 3 by camping.
How dare you?
Just to upset him, but when you're playing against AI and you're camping, I mean that's just a lot of fun. So that was cool to see. And also like Bill, 2 episodes ago.
Sure.
He's out there standing with no cover, trying to shoot at people who are shooting back at him. You're like, Bill,
in the middle of the street.
Years in the middle of the street. You've had years to figure out a duck blind where you could go and you can just pop him dead. And have like a gun port where like they can't shoot you back, and you out there just shooting. Come on, Bill. That's not a Bill thing to do. So I'm just happy. There was also what was clear was that when Joel took out the sniper was he was well supplied. Like his ammunition wasn't a factor. There were probably boxes of ammo right there.
Right.
And so having to load and shoot was the thing. It was also great to see that Joel's like, this guy's aim is nothing. I'll be fine. And in fact, it wasn't. And to contrast that with Joel's aim, which was like incredible, taking clicker by clicker down with headshots. That was good, especially because his aim felt like video game aim.
Right?
Like you can shoot them and they're going to go down, but you're not going to make every shot. And he didn't make every shot, but he made all the shots that needed to be made. You know what I mean? So it was, I don't know, it was a good moment that felt like an adaptation from a video game. Done right.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think what was also really interesting about that moment, right, is that earlier in the episode, both Ellie and Joel, say that she's not not her dad, right? And then at that point in the episode, Kathleen is asking, before this attack, before the wave of attack, you think the whole world revolves around him, that he's worth it, everything? And then you can also see Joel processing that in his face. So the camera switches to Joel in his sniper post where he can't aim or shoot at anything, and he's processing that and kind of processing, what it means to him, what Ellie means to him. And it's at that point where he becomes, the eye in the sky, protecting her as she's trying to get through the various waves and reach the other individuals, which, is similar to kind of what you do in the game, except in the game it's more broad that you have to protect everyone from, the wave of infected, the wave of the resistance. Right. So there's a little difference there, but I think it makes it even more powerful. And then on the flip side, Henry, is trying to save his brother in all sorts of stages. And Henry also tells us that he's never actually killed anyone with his own hands. And his first kill is his brother. And once he gets that realization, that's something he realizes he can't live with. And so that's even powerful.
You do wonder, though. Joel was trying to get the gun from him.
Yeah.
Because, he was... And if Joel had managed to get the gun from him, and he wasn't going to beat him to get it, he was trying to talk him down, what would have happened then? There's a big what if in my head. Like, how could this have gone differently? But he was broken by the destruction of his brother.
The only way it goes differently, I think, is he grabs some paints and he paints a photo and then gets himself a bottle of wine and duck and then goes to sleep. Because I think it's inevitable, as we mentioned before.
What?
It's Shakespearean, so they both have to die.
Is that what Shakespearean means to you? Okay.
Yes, it means Bill and Frank in representation.
Right.
This got to be
a
Bill
total
and Frank.
a total tragedy. What I thought was interesting
3
about
suicides across, 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I thought it was interesting that when Joel sees the sniper and sees that he's clearly like an older man and obviously not very good shot. There's like a little mercy in his heart. He wants to spare him. He tries to give him an out. He says like, put the rifle down and go and don't touch it for an hour. And
right, he's like, give us an hour to get out of here, and then you're fine. But this guy is a follower of Kathleen, and those guys don't take no for an answer. Yeah,
I think in a way it was good that he was forced to kill him, because it could have been worse.
It's the second time he was forced to kill a resistance guy.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this time, the first time he killed the resistance guy, the first time he killed Brian, it wasn't obvious that Brian was part of like the quote unquote good guys when it comes to Spectre.
Right.
Brian literally seemed like the NPC AI that you shoot in like any video game, right? I'm gonna get you. Oh, you killed me, whatever. This guy was definitely more, I don't want to say human, but like he was definitely more sympathetic. And yet, even the most sympathetic people could be dangerous. Let's go back to Sam. Sam was a little boy,
sure,
deadly, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. It was very interesting. Can we talk about Joel and the truth for a second? In the beginning, when Henry meets Joel, he's detecting by Joel's tone. Henry's detecting by Joel's tone that, like, Joel's unhappy, and that Joel's gonna like maybe kill him. And Ellie's gonna be like, no, he always sounds like that. But as much as Ellie is smoothing it over, I think Joel was pretty much gonna kill him.
I mean, we've seen in the past that Joel has done what he has to do in order to protect himself and Ellie.
And I also feel like Joel, he can't not, like, he can't. There's no way for Joel to hide his feelings.
Yeah,
that's not who he is, right? So like he can't pretend that he's in love with Tess despite the demands of the post-apocalyptic moment and finding someone who wants to be with you. He just can't. He can't be. Not that he can't be bothered. He doesn't have it in him to pretend in order to be what Tess wants him to be, right?
Right.
When he tells the old man with the rifle that he just has to put the gun down, we know he's telling the truth. There's something about the way Pascal's playing it, where like when he says something, he's just telling the truth.
Yeah.
He's not going to mess around like how Kathleen is. Oh, we'll give you a trial, then you could die, right? And you can see Henry's confession with Joel making Joel uncomfortable in multiple ways. So on the one hand, Joel's like, I don't deal with collaborators, whatever. On the other hand, Henry's telling Joel about like how it is that he came to be a collaborator, the situation with leukemia and all that stuff. And Joel's discomfort has almost everything to do, at least from my understanding of watching it, with the fact that it's a scenario that isn't easy to reconcile. Like, I understand you did what you did. I still don't like collaborators. I really understand. Oh, he had leukemia. Is that different? I don't know. Like, it was unclear. Like, Joel didn't know what to think, and that made him uncomfortable. And then, I just feel like overall, it's becoming very clear, even when Joel's like, "Hey, you trust me?" That the way Pascal's playing Joel, everything he says is on his face, right? It's almost on the surface, it feels like it's almost an easy way to play the role. But he's got to convey that kind of truth with everything that comes out of his mouth, which is difficult to do. So anyway, I just like the fact that we're like learning more about Joel, and it's coming through not just with like, kind of this archetype, but like as he speaks, as Ellie explains him to others, all these things. So I think it's been done well.
No, he does have an asshole voice. So.
Yes, he's got like resting bitch voice, or like the equivalent of resting bitch face for a voice.
But he speaks his truth, and as I said at the sort of top of this episode, life is complex, man.
Life is complex.
Yeah,
I've got.
Life is complex.
I've got 2 or 3 other points that I wanted to bring up. I don't know if you guys have any other things. One of the things that I really appreciated about this, the dynamic between Henry and Sam, is I love that moment where Henry sees that Sam is scared, and he knows that they have to go out into the open where they might be shot when they're hiding out in the building in the beginning of the episode before they run into Joel and Ellie. And he imbues Sam with confidence before they go out in the open by painting his face as a superhero, like kind of like gifting him Dumbo's magic feather, you know?
Mm.
I just love that moment. And then you follow that up with almost immediately afterwards a shot of Henry looking out the window to see Joel, and the reflection on his face, you see his eyes are covered with a red strip as if it was a superhero mask as well.
Ooh, that's right. Good observation. It's pretty good storytelling, visual storytelling. I like that. When Joel says having people depend on you is the hard part.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you get that with the Edelstein is like, he's scared because you're scared. And then Henry has to kind of put on a brave face, and then what you just said happens with the paint over his face, and then the light in Henry's eyes. So like Henry has to become a different person because, or at least hide his emotions, because it's the only way he's going to get Sam to have the confidence to do what he has to do. But I gotta say, as a parent, that hit me pretty hard. You know, having people depend on you is the hard part.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was footloose and fancy free. No one depended on me. It's like, all right, we're gonna go to the club. But now it's like, am I gonna have this beer? Because tomorrow morning I need to be up for the kids.
Yes, I mean that mirrors the whole thing with Frank and Bill, with Bill saying, "I wasn't afraid of anything until I met you." You know?
Yeah, until like once you love somebody, it's over.
Right. Also, I think what's interesting about that moment was Joel tells Henry that surviving the chaos, this experience, this post-apocalyptic experience, is easier when you're a kid. You don't have anyone else relying on you. And yet, shortly thereafter, we see that Ellie has put herself into a position of having Sam rely on her, which then she fails in that promise to stay awake for Sam.
It doesn't work out.
Yes. Which is why she leaves him the message.
Probably why she gets so upset. Yeah.
Yes, that's why she leaves him the message, "I'm sorry," on his grave, which is the tip off to Joel that she knew that he was infected. So I just thought that was really interesting.
You think that's a tip off to Joel? Because I mean, people say I'm sorry when other people die all the time.
Yeah, but you could see it in his face. His face looking at the message. To me, I read that as an understanding that Ellie knew that he was infected before he showed it.
Okay. All right.
That could be a misreading. It could be a different reading, but that's how I read the scene.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting if she tries to explain it next episode, because now the world building has to happen. We know how cordyceps infects and all that stuff.
Sure.
But like, are we going to learn a little bit about how her immunity doesn't help others, or like, you know, whatever it's going to be?
Right.
They're taking the way the fungus works in a different direction than in the game. So that's kind of a thing.
I think also, like, that was part of why I was confused about what she thought she was doing by rubbing her blood on him, because, you know, either immunity via the blood has to work either in a couple of different ways. Either it would have to happen through a transfusion, which is a much more complicated process than just rubbing your blood on someone's wound, or
absolutely, because it's in his body, it's not on the surface of his body.
Yes.
Right. It's like amputation in other zombie fiction.
Right.
You have to cut it off. You can't just like say, "Oh, we're going to put some disinfectant on."
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. He's infected. He's not surface.
or it would be in extracting her blood and developing an antibody from that, which, we haven't
serum.
seen. Right. We haven't seen any of that, either of those things play out yet in this episode or in this series.
Right.
A couple other things. I loved how in the midst of the chaos of the infected ambush on the street, we suddenly just cut to the silence of the motel. It's like, we don't need to wrap up this scene. We know, our heroes have left the scene. We don't need to see how the rest of the scene plays out. We'll just do a straight cut to exterior shot of the motel in complete silence. So
yeah, it's not a gratuitous show that way. Like other shows would have had like a long, like a series of like a cut to this person to that person, faces we've seen throughout the episode and how they all succumbed, but that's not what we saw here.
And
a lot of implication. The show does very well with the implication.
Very well.
Even with the killing of those people who quote unquote were going to get a trial.
Yep.
You
don't even hear the gunshots. You just
Right.
hear the sort of the anxious, raised voices as the resistance are coming in.
Into the room.
Yeah. Which is nice because we know what's going to happen. We don't need it spelled out for us.
Exactly. There's not enough time for that too. You got 10 episodes, people.
Yes. We got a lot of ground to cover. I knew the moment that was coming when Henry would kill himself because it happens exactly the way it does in the game, but it was no less moving to watch it play out in the series as it was in the game. And
also, you don't see anything like you don't see like
right.
An exit wound coming out of his head, a splatter. The camera cuts away. You hear the shot, and that's that.
Yes,
and I think
it's not gratuitous.
Again, right? Exactly. You don't need that. What's so great about the show is because other shows have been around, because there's been like, Black Summer or The Walking Dead or whatever. The violence doesn't need to be in your face because we all know what's up. It just has to be applied, and that's good enough to get what's happening so we can move on.
Yeah.
And that's great.
And the last thing I wanted to bring up was that question that Sam poses. If you turn into a monster, is it still you inside? That is a terrifying existential question. And probably a cornerstone thesis of this series, I feel.
I feel like that was the case with Kathleen.
For sure.
That she turns into this monster, and it is her. Like it's and when we're in her bedroom,
right?
It's clear that who she is, like this disregard for life that gets in her way. It's literally who she is. She is here to avenge her brother, regardless of the cost. I'm going to close those guys. Could have taken all that ammo. They could have chucked the grenade into that room with the door and exploded, maybe taken out some baddies, and then as the infected scream out of the room, had a shooting gallery where they take out loads of infected, pretty effectively. But instead, she's like, "Well, just close this door so I can pursue Henry."
Her priorities are Miss
Henry isn't my seventh priority.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
So, it's absurd. She's absurd.
Yes.
So yes, we totally learn that the monster is who she is, and the question becomes, how much is retained of you when you become infected? And in this particular zombie fiction, it actually is it's a diminishing amount, right? So early infected, like Henry, Sam rather, you can still see the Sam there, kind of, right?
Right.
Or there's a point where you become a clicker, and
right,
how much of you is left, and
right,
if you become a bloater, are you all cordyceps? It's unclear.
It's a good thing. It's a good question. I think we see, in that scene from episode 1 where that little boy is making his way into the Fedra camp and he's been bitten on the leg. You see him in sort of this semi-catatonic state. That's
we associate that with his trauma from being the only survivor of whatever party he was in.
And lastly, I love that the comics are here from the game, which the comics in the game, you can collect those comics. It's a collectible achievement. And to have it demonstrated here in the show just fills my heart with joy to see that translated. It's a useless, I think, aspect. Didn't need to be in the show, but I'm glad that it is.
For a straightforward episode, there seem to be straightforward escort mission, whatever. There seems to just be a lot just kind of intermingled in there. I loved it.
Yeah. Just one technical aspect I wanted to bring up. Looking at the behind the scenes for this episode, they pointed out that they used movement coach Terry Notary to coach the infected for the ambush sequence, and he's kind of like he is like the go-to mocap guy for animals and creatures, like even more so than Andy Serkis was back in the Lord of the Rings days. He was instrumental in the Planet of the Apes series. He was the dog in Call of the Wild. He was in the movie The Square. Like, he's kind of like a rock star for motion cap movement coaches, if there is such a thing.
Will he break out the way that Andy Serkis has to play roles like what's it called? Clown.
He seems to me that the kind of guy that loves doing what he's doing. He loves his little niche of being this movement coach. Yeah. I don't think we have any ephemera this week. I don't think we had time.
Well, there was a study.
That
came out where an experimental vaccine is showing a little promise in fighting fungal infections in humans.
Oh, so our fate doesn't have to be taken over by cordyceps?
Yeah, I mean, this is experimental. It's not done.
Sure.
But I think ending on a little hope is a good thing.
Yes. Hopefully we can speed up that research before it's too late for us. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Quarantine Zone. I'm going to go around the table, and starting with you, Dwayne, I'm going to ask, where can people find your work on the internet when you're not talking about The Last of Us?
Check me out on twitter.com/DwayneD. Tosin, what about you?
You can find me on Instagram. Instagram as Burnt Toast 45, so BURNTTOAST 45, and that's where you can check me and see a bunch of different photographic stuff that I work on. Photography. What about yourself, Andy?
You can find me at Mr. Babyman. That is my handle on Twitter and Instagram. Again, our show is on Twitter and Facebook at QZPod. We're on all major podcast distribution networks. Add us, tell your friends. Join us next week when we cover the 6th episode of The Last of Us, entitled Kin. Until then, please drop us an email.
Yeah, send us a good voice memo on email, and we might be able to get it into the show.
Tweet us and leave us a comment on iTunes, and we will see you guys next week.